Hello and welcome. I'm Ann Carrico from AnnieandEverything.com, and I'm here to talk about all things homeschooling high school. Well, it is actually college search season for many, and it can be overwhelming when you look at all the factors about searching for a college. There are so many schools out there. How can you narrow them down? There are some factors that, in my opinion, are important to look at. There are others that are hyped up as being important that I just don't think are really that important, that you can kind of just knock off your list. We're going to discuss both of those categories today, the ones that I do believe are incredibly important that you need to pay much attention to, and others that are nothing to get worried about. Okay, so let's get started. I think this is going to be an obvious one. The main, most important, don't ignore this factor when picking a college, is going to be major course of study, the program that your kid wants to study when they're in college. And you know what? If your kid doesn't know what this is yet, then I wouldn't be too concerned about the college search at all. If your kid doesn't know what they want to major in, then I would suggest taking a year or two to figure that out before heading to a 4-year college, where you're going to spend a lot of money for your kid to try to figure this out. And when they do, it might be at a place that doesn't even have the major that they finally figure out anyway. So maybe you want to spend some time at a junior college or at the community college, or even just working for a couple of years until that becomes something that your kid has decided upon. But once they have decided about a major, then you don't want to waste your time looking at colleges, even if they look wonderful, even if you know somebody that goes there, even if you've been on the campus and fell in love with it. You don't want to waste time looking at colleges that don't have the major that your kid is interested in. Don't try to make something work if it's not there. There are colleges that have like programs that you can design for yourself, but I'm going to advise against that. I would say find the colleges that actually have the major rather than trying to make something up as you go. So, how do you find the colleges that even offer the major that your kid is interested in? There is one place that I've found super helpful about this, and that is called Big Future. You can go on that website and list the major that your kid wants to take, as well as many other filters, and come up with a list of colleges that have that major. And then you can start going to websites and looking at them that way. Be sure that you have narrowed your search down to only colleges that have the major that your kid is interested in. Doesn't make sense to waste time anywhere else. So that's a big one. It's an obvious one. Let's move on. Another factor that you are going to want to look at when it comes to colleges is, the distance from home. How far away from home do you feel comfortable with your kid being? Is it an hour? Is it 3 hours? Is it 10 hours? I'm going to tell you what, I've had a kid 1.5 hours away from home. That's wonderful. They can come home on weekends when necessary. I've had 3 kids 8+ hours from home. And that becomes a little more difficult when it comes to not necessarily semester breaks. You can usually get them home for semester breaks, even if it means you got to drive and get them and bring them back. Holidays, though, can become an issue. So my kids had to stay on campus, for instance, over Easter break, which is pretty short, or over Thanksgiving break, which sometimes is long, but sometimes isn't. Depends on the school. And that was not always great for them. If they've got friends in the area or family in the area that they can go spend those times with, that's one thing. But if they don't, I still remember the phone call on Good Friday that my daughter had no cash and she had to last through Easter weekend, and the campus cafeteria was not going to be open and she did not have a car. And we weren't sure how she was going to handle that. So you definitely need to consider these things and plan for that. Is that going to be a hardship for you to have your kid that far away, to transport them and all their stuff, and also to be able to get them home for the holidays and for semester breaks? Because that adds an additional expense to the college experience. You're definitely going to want to decide where is the radius past which you don't want to go. So you can make that a mileage radius, you can make that an hour's drive radius, but definitely think that through. That is definitely an important factor to consider. Trust me when I tell you that that college that is 15 hours away is not the one your kid absolutely has to go to. There are plenty of colleges within a closer radius that they will be fine with. If you can't handle the 15 hours away, either emotionally or financially, then mark that one off your list from the get-go and bring that radius in a little tighter. There are plenty of colleges within that radius that are going to work just fine. I've had kids go to all different types of colleges. And to be honest with you, and we're just going to set this straight up front, the difference is the kid. What does the kid make of their college experience? It's not always the college itself. Yes, we want to try to make the best fit that we can, but is your kid going to take what is at whatever college they go to and make the best of it? That's the determining factor. So all of these factors that we're looking at today, while they are important or less important, the big factor is your kid. So keep that in mind too, that whatever college you end up deciding on is probably going to be just fine. Hopefully that eases a little bit of the fear factor for you right now. Okay, so moving on, other factors to consider that are actually somewhat important. We've talked about, obviously, the major. We've talked about distance from home. Now, obviously, this is another obvious one, cost. Are you going to be able to afford it? This one doesn't actually get narrowed down until a little farther in the search because you don't know what kind of financial aid your kid is going to get. You don't know what scholarships they're going to be offered until they've actually applied and been accepted. So sometimes that means you have to pick a range of schools as far as cost goes and then apply to all of them within that range that you've narrowed down. With all these other factors we're going to talk about. But applying to a range of schools of different costs is a good idea because you know what? You may get that dream school that costs a gazillion dollars a year. They may offer a full ride scholarship. You don't know until you've gone all the way with that application process. But you want to have some in your back pocket that are lesser cost so that if that beautiful one doesn't come to fruition, you've still got some others that you are able to handle financially. I will say that the full ride situation is something that doesn't come along very often. So sometimes you might be willing to have your kid go to a school that is not necessarily their favorite because they're getting a better offer there than they are at the one that they really, really, really wanted to go to. That is also okay. Again, it's more about how your kid will deal with the college that they're at and making the best of whatever is opportunities that they have there. And that is something that you can talk with your kid about from the get-go. Hey, we're going to do the best to get you at the college that you feel like you would be happiest at. But if that doesn't happen, there are still plenty of opportunities no matter where you go. And you'll still make friends and all that other stuff. So again, while cost can be a definitely determining factor, sometimes you can't decide that until later on in the process. So my advice is to apply to several different tiers of cost brackets about that. You're going to find your junior colleges and your community college are the least expensive. Your private colleges are probably the most expensive. Your state schools are somewhere in between. Apply to all of them in one way, shape, or form and see what happens. Remember, too, that cost is a factor over 4 years. So I don't advise going into it with, oh, well, we'll pay for this a semester at a time. And if at any time we have to withdraw you, then we can do that. But let's start with the gung-ho. I don't think that's a great idea. Now, you're going to notice that this entire episode is a lot of my opinion, but it's based on my experience visiting many colleges, having 4 different kids going to college now. I'm in the middle of college search season with my last one. So yeah, I'm going to give you my opinion, my best advice based on all of that. So remember that you have to keep this up for 4 years. So if you are scraping everything together to get that first semester paid for, and then you have no idea how the rest is going to happen, might not be a great idea to choose that school. Plan for the whole 4 years. Are we going to be able to do this? And if the answer is yes, then that would be one that you would decide upon more than the one that is the absolute reach and stretch. Just my advice, and I've made that mistake, okay? So this is coming from a place of hard-fought lessons learned and still paying the financial consequences for them. So a little bit of truth right there for you. Okay, here's another factor that is actually quite huge for many, many teens, and that is religious affiliation of the college. You know, a lot of private colleges have some sort of religious affiliation going on with them, whether it be with a specific denomination or church or just a specific religion in general. And this is something that needs to be a conversation with you and your teen. What do they want to be involved in as far as their college religious life? Do they want any? Maybe they prefer to go to a totally secular state school, no religious affiliation at all. Or maybe they do want to go to a Christian school. But even to be honest with you, among Christian schools, there are differences there too in regards to the lifestyle, the expectations of the students for dress code and behavior. The expectations for chapel attendance, it can vary greatly. Some Christian schools have chapel once a week, others have it almost every day. That is something to consider, and ask your teen what they want to do. Don't send them someplace where they're going to be uncomfortable. Remember that the primary reason they are going to college is for their academic preparation for their career. Yes, at the same time, we may want them to be, well, we obviously want them to be growing as a human being, and that may include some spiritual or religious growth. But if they're going to be in a situation where they're feeling uncomfortable because of either too heavy restrictions or not enough limitations, then they're not going to succeed as well as you want them to there. So that is definitely something to consider and communicate about and research, and then determine with your teen whether they can live with this situation or they can't. Again, over 4 years. And if they can, then leave it on the list. And if they can't, you need to honor that as the parent. Don't try to force them into something that they're going to not be happy with. And while we're on the subject of Christian colleges, I would like to bring up one that you may not have heard about. It's called Emmaus Bible College, and it is the sponsor of this episode today. Emmaus Bible College is a small Christian school in Dubuque, Iowa. And there's a couple of distinctives about Emmaus College that I'd like to tell you about and maybe get you interested enough to go check out their website, which is emmaus.edu. That's emmaus.edu. So here's one distinctive about Emmaus, and that is they have what they call a global campus. That is an online learning opportunity. And guess what? It's perfect for doing dual enrollment with your kid. They charge much less per credit hour for dual enrollment, and your high school student can get college credit while they're still homeschooling high school with you. If you listened to last week's podcast episode where I was discussing motivation, this would be a great way to get some of that outside accountability that I talked about then. And if you haven't listened to that one yet, go back and listen to it because it's a good one. But back to Emmaus Bible College, here's another distinctive that they have, and this is fascinating to me. I've not heard about this anywhere else. Every student who graduates from Emmaus Bible College actually graduates with a double major. And the first major is in Bible and theology, and then the second major is whatever course of study they've decided. They offer programs in business administration, applied mathematics, computer studies, nursing, teacher education, and others. So there's plenty to choose from as far as that second major is concerned. But if you want your kid to have a great Bible education at the Christian college that they're going to, then Emmaus Bible College gives them a full Bible and theology major as well as the second major in whatever they choose to study. That is something unique and different that I've not heard of before. So definitely check out Emmaus Bible College for your kid. Again, that's emmaus.edu, emmaus.edu. And one more thing I want to tell you about them is right now they are giving away a free dual enrollment class. That is a $495 value that they are giving away. And I will put the link for how you can enter that giveaway in the show notes for this episode. So one factor that I do think can be important is take a look at the average SAT and ACT of incoming students, of the students that have been admitted to the college. You can pretty much find this almost anywhere. Another place to look for information about colleges is niche.com, and I will put the link for that in the show notes as well. And that's one of the places where you can see what is the average ACT and SAT for incoming students. Now, this is not necessarily a huge factor, but it can make a difference because it can affect the level of instruction that's being offered. If you've got a kid who has a 30 ACT, you may not want to send them to a college where the average incoming freshman has a 21 ACT score. Just because your 30 ACT student may not feel challenged by the courses at that school, may get bored at that school, may not feel like they're learning enough for what they want to learn. Again, though, this is one of those ones that you have to weigh. Again, cost can be a factor. Maybe they're getting a full ride at that school. And also, many colleges offer honors programs so that those kids who do want to be challenged more have the opportunity to do that. And as always, again, it's what your kid does with what the opportunities that they have. So your 30 ACT kid at a school where the average is 21 may be able to find opportunities on their own to learn and grow differently than what is only offered in the classroom. Maybe they could do an internship with a professor or something like that to create those opportunities for themselves that they might not otherwise have if they just follow the regular program. So again, look at that. Don't necessarily mark something completely off the list, but do realize that that might be a factor, and find out from your kid how much they want to put into searching for opportunities, or how much they'd rather just that already be ingrained. So then they want to apply to the one that has the ACT and SAT score that's more consistent with what they got themselves. Something to think about. And lastly, again, this is not a hard and fast factor that is going to apply every single time, but it can be one that you want to take into consideration, and that is the size of the campus and the number of kids in the student body. So there are colleges, as low as 200 to 300 students. There are colleges as high as tens of thousands, 40, 50,000 students, and everywhere in between. So your extreme introvert may not be super happy at one of those mega campuses. By the same token, your extreme extrovert might not be happy at one of the very smaller campuses. I don't think this is a huge thing because your kid's going to make friends no matter where they go, and that's going to become their nucleus. But it can be a situation where one kid feels incredibly intimidated by being at a campus that just is so large for them, or another kid can feel like there's just not enough fun to be had, there's not enough socialization, there's not enough clubs, there's not enough opportunities to meet people and learn and grow because this campus is so small and can't offer those things. Something to consider with each individual child in mind. As I was editing this episode, I thought of another factor that I want to bring up as an important thing to keep an eye out for, especially as homeschoolers. And so, I'm coming on after the fact to record this. You're going to see different hair, different earrings. Sorry about that, but I didn't want to leave this episode as is. I wanted to add this factor in. This is, again, another personal opinion and something that everybody has to decide for themselves. But I want to say that one of the things that I think is super important is the application process itself, especially in regards to homeschooled students. And the reason I say this is there are some colleges that are very aware of homeschooled students and are very respectful of homeschooled students and value homeschool students and understand that homeschool students are going to have different criteria and different things to bring to the table than public school students. And there are other schools that are going to expect homeschool students to jump through extra hoops in order to prove themselves during the application process. That's always a red flag for me. If there's a college where they don't understand homeschooling and they expect a homeschool student to do X, Y, and Z different or in addition to anybody else who's applying so that the homeschool student can prove that they are just as valid as the other applicants, that's when I'm going to say take that one off the table right now. Ditch that school. And here's why I say that, because that's what your kid will encounter when they go to that school. They're going to encounter it over and over and over again. in the administration, with the professors. If that's what's happening during the application process, then that's what's going to happen when your kid is there at the school. So just real quick, I wanted to jump in and say, watch out during the application process. And if there are extra things that a homeschool student has to do in order to validate themselves, then you might want to consider that that's not a school that your homeschooled graduate should go to. Okay, now back to what I was saying already. Okay, so those are really the only factors that I think at this moment that I can remember anyway are going to really affect your college search. Here are some factors that I just think we need to knock off as not even needing to worry about them. One of them is teacher-student ratio. Y'all, this is such an overhyped ratio number. It's really not that important. Does it really matter if the teacher-student ratio is 15-1 or 10-1? Probably not going to make a difference in your kid's everyday experience. Okay, class sizes might be smaller. That might mean more interaction with the professor, but you know what? It might not. Everything depends on the professor himself, not on the ratio, not on the class size. Some professors are just in, lecture, gone. Other professors, even with larger classes, are much more interactive with students in the class. It's all going to depend on individual professors, and that's something you can't predict from the get-go until your kid is actually in the classes. So I personally don't think teacher-student ratio is worth nixing or being super excited about a school for. You know, I went to Penn State University back in the days when it was only 35,000 students. I survived in those huge lecture hall classes. Not every student is going to be super happy about those. Again, that's a huge school and it's going to have those. And that's just something that every student needs to learn how to work through. I don't think teacher-student ratio is an indicator necessarily of your kid's success or of whether that college is a good or bad place for them to be. Again, a lot of my opinion in here. That one is mine. Okay, another thing to take with a grain of salt is all those online reviews that you see, or a grade. Now, I mentioned niche.com, and they give an overall grade to every college, and I'm going to say I can't put a lot of stock in that, or the reviews that you'll read that students submit. First of all, we all know when we go to Amazon or wherever we go to look at reviews, we know that it's either the lovers or the haters, right? And oftentimes it's the haters who really feel that burden to get heard. So you can read the reviews if you think it's important or if you think you want to, but I'm encouraging you not to give them much value when it comes to narrowing down that list of choices for your kid. Here's another one, and this one I've already actually received some disagreement on because I've expressed it elsewhere. I don't think the campus itself is a huge factor in the initial process. Now, I'm going to say right now that I do think the campus can be a factor when you're making your final selection. After you've applied to colleges, after you've got acceptances back, then the campus could be something that makes you decide, I do want to go to this one, I don't want to go to that one. In that sense, I think it's great to use the campus for that purpose. But to feel like you have to take a bunch of college tours in order to decide where to even apply, I think that's a waste of time and financial resources because there are so many pictures online, there are virtual tours online. It's not like you can't get a good idea of what the campus is going to be like. Now, yeah, will the campus, there's a difference being on the campus than looking at it online? Of course, nobody is denying that. But again, you can put that part off until you're actually deciding what the final choice is going to be. I don't think campus needs to be that huge of a factor when you're doing your initial narrowing down. Again, my opinion, and it's okay to disagree with it, but I've been around the block a few times on this issue, and if you are not wanting to or not able to spend the time and effort to make a bunch of campus visits before your kid even applies, don't feel guilty about it. Lastly, here's another one that they keep touting everywhere, and it just, I can't understand why it's a big deal. Earnings after graduation. They want to tell us what their students earn after graduation. Oh, that's going to be so variable, and it's going to depend so much on the individual. It's not going to depend on the college necessarily. Again, what major is your kid going into, and then do they do a good job in school to get the grades that they need to get the good job after they graduate? That's going to be the determining factor. Don't use income after graduation to decide which school to go to or which school to apply to. I just don't think that that's an important thing to look at. Doesn't matter. So those are the things that I think do matter and don't really matter at all when it comes to the college search process and narrowing down where your kid is going to apply. We do put a lot of pressure on ourselves to find the perfect school for our kid to go to. And I'm here to tell you there is no perfect situation. You're going to have some pros and some cons no matter where your kid ends up going. Again, it's going to be dependent on their effort, their attitude, and that's something you'll just have to keep communicating with them about. Does that mean that a wrong decision is never made? No, of course not. Sometimes kids do transfer schools and find a place that they're better at. But when you're in the initial search process, don't put a bunch of pressure on yourself that it has to be absolutely, utterly perfect. There are so many factors that go into it, and some do have to outweigh others. Hopefully now, though, I've given you an idea of which factors you can just set aside as not important and which maybe you do want to bear in mind a little bit more carefully. Remember, homeschooling high school may not always be easy, but it doesn't have to be that hard. Just keep your expectations manageable, and I have confidence in you. Have a great day.